Shalom and welcome to my father's yahrzeit class. I'd like to know who's on with me today, so please, in the chat box, please tell me your name so I can greet you. And I think we need to turn down the heat. Yeah, thank you. I want to say thank you to my tech team here, which is Svi Lebedkin, who is really, I could not have this YouTube channel without Svi's expert and very patient help. And also my husband, Yaakov Rigler, who provided the music and who is my support team in every single way in life. So let's see. Shalom, Oriella. Oriella is my good friend who lives here in the Jewish Quarter. Anybody else want to sign in? Just put your name in the chat box. Oh, I have Sara from Teaneck, who is one of my the members of my Kesher Wife Club, who's a real star. Anybody else want to sign in? It's okay if I don't know you personally. Okay, so while you may or may not be doing that, I want to start. So today is my father's 32nd yahrzeit. And this class is dedicated for his Aliyat Neshama. Aliyat Neshama means that every person, every soul who passes from this world to the next world has an opportunity on the yahrzeit, the anniversary of their death, that otherwise they don't have. Once a person leaves this world is the lowest of all possible worlds, but it is the only world where free choice is possible, where people can choose between right and wrong and good and bad, because things are so foggy down here. And when a soul gets to the next world, they can't choose anymore. They can't make choices that will take their. What is the next world? Of course, the next world, unlike some religions that talk about 72 virgins, etc. The next world, of course, is a world that is entirely not physical. Space and time only exists in this physical world that we know. And so the other world is a world that is not physical. And in this world, where we have the opportunity to make choices, we elevate our souls so that we get the reward. And I use the reward very, very cautiously, that word, because I remember when I was growing up and I was going to Hebrew school in the conservative movement, they used to say, well, other religions teach about pie in the sky when you die. And Judaism is a this world religion. And they never even told us there was another world and that there was anything going on in another world. It was like any mention of the other world was like something really like stupid. That was what the implication we got, because Judaism was a this world religion. Well, the rabbis clearly say in the Talmud that this world is just the prose story, the corridor that leads to the next world, which is the world of truth. And what's the reward we get in the next world? We get to bask in the light of the divine presence, because the only show in town in the next world is the spiritual show of God's presence. And whatever our choices have been in this world, we get to be closer or further away from the divine presence. And once we get there, we can't move, because we can no longer make free will choices. But our people who love us down in this world, they can do things like do mitzvahs or give charity or give like this class. The class will only be for my father's Aliyat Neshama. When we do things in this world, especially on the yahrzeit, the day of death, it can elevate the soul in the next world, because they cannot elevate themselves, but we can elevate them when we do this for their intention. But we only elevate them by an action. So me giving this class will only elevate my father's soul in the next world if something that you learn in this class inspires you to do something good in this world. And then that's accrues to my father's merit in the next world, and he has an Aliyat Neshama, an elevation of the soul. Okay, so I wanted to share with you Oh, and meanwhile, Claire has made herself known. Claire from Toronto. Welcome, Claire. Happy to have you on. My father died on a Wednesday, and I was not there. That's a long story, which I will not go into. But I got to Philadelphia, arrived at the Philadelphia airport on Thursday morning, and my brother Joe picked me up at the airport, and he immediately took me to Bertler's funeral parlor in Cherry Hill, where my father's body had been taken. And I wanted to see my father. I had not had a chance to say goodbye, and it was very important to me to say goodbye. And so I got to the funeral parlor, and I was ushered into their white-tiled refrigerated room. And there my father's body was lying on a gurney, covered by a sheet. My father would have a Jewish burial, but the Hevra Kadisha, the burial society, had not been called yet because I hadn't arrived until just then. And so those arrangements had not been made. So my father's body was covered with a sheet, but they had pulled back the sheet in such a way that his face was showing, which the Hevra Kadisha would not do. Jews, we do not do viewings. We do not look at the body. Once the soul has left the body, which is what we call death, the Hevra Kadisha has certain ways, the burial society has certain ways. It's very important, by the way, to have a Jewish burial. I don't know who all is going to be seeing this live or going to see this in the future as a recording, but I have to tell you that it's really important if you're Jewish to have a Jewish burial. And you can get that in any city in America by calling the burial society, the Hevra Kadisha of your town or city. So, so my father's face was exposed, and I saw him. And his face was glowing. And this was a surprise to me because he had been dead for more than 12 hours. And I thought it kind of would be gray, but it wasn't. It was glowing. And I experienced something there in that refrigerated room, standing next to my father's body, that I want to share with you. I wrote it up, the whole story, a few years after he died, in my book called God Winked. This is God Winked, Tales and Lessons from My Spiritual Adventures. And I want to read it to you, read you the story, and then I would like to add some things to it. So it goes like this. My father did not believe in angels. He could not be bothered with spiritual notions or metaphysical concepts. My father was not a religious man. He was very Jewish. He was very dedicated to our Jewish. We belonged to a conservative synagogue, Bethel, originally in Camden, then in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And he went with my mother every Friday night to the late Friday night services. And he was on the board. He was a life trustee of the synagogue. When they built a new synagogue in Cherry Hill, my father worked very hard to raise money for the new building. He was very dedicated to it. But when he stood in synagogue, I never saw him pray. He used to stand there, sit there in the synagogue with his finger in the prayer book. His finger was in the prayer book. And I used to joke with him and I would say, when you die, your finger will go to heaven. Well, surprise, surprise to me, that was not the case. So I was, of course, the religious one. I had spent 15 years in a Hindu ashram pursuing spiritual pursuits. I was seeking God. 5 years before my father died, I came to Jerusalem. I became an Orthodox Jew. I was keeping mitzvot. I was very, very God-centered. But my father had a little problem with God. Two problems. First of all, my father had never been exposed to any kind of real Jewish education. His parents came from the Ukraine, from near Odessa, to Philadelphia in 1902, the year before he was born. My grandfather at the age of 18 was going to be drafted into the Tsar's army. So, and my grandmother used to always tell me, when Jews are drafted into the Tsar's army, they have to serve 14 years and 8 months. They have to serve. Oh, there's my father. Okay, great. Okay, sweet, but you can put the picture down for now because I'm telling you this. That's a good story. This is my father at the end of his life. I think that's at our wedding. So my grandmother used to say a Jew in the Tsar's army had to serve 14 years and 8 months and eat horse meat. So when my grandfather was 18 years old and he was drafted, he was like, he wasn't sticking around for that. And so he decided to go to America, and he asked his friend's younger sister to come with him. And her mother said, you aren't going anywhere with anybody you're not married to. She was 16 years old. So they got married. And they came to America, to Philadelphia, to South Philly. And a year later, my father was born. So his mother was a 17-year-old immigrant. And his father was a 19-year-old he started out with a push cart, sold vegetables, and eventually graduated to a horse and buggy, to selling vegetables. Eventually, he had a vegetable store on Dock Street in Philadelphia. So he never had any Jewish education to speak of. And even when he became an adult and he married my mother and they belonged to the conservative synagogue, and he always went for courses, the Jewish education courses in the synagogue. My mother schlepped him. He never learned any real Torah. So he never knew Torah. He was never exposed to Torah. I never learned Torah until I was 37 years old and came to Jerusalem. The other problem my father had with God was that his brother, Harry, my father was the oldest of 4 children, and he had 2 younger sisters and a younger brother. And Harry died of a heart attack at the age of 42. And this totally devastated the whole family. And my father used to say we would be driving through Arch Street in Philadelphia, where a lot of drunks were like lying on the ground on the street. And my father would say, was it Arch Street or Race Street? Maybe it was Race Street. My father would say, how do they get to live and Harry died? What kind of God would do this? My father, he never had anyone that he could refer to to answer that question, the question of how good people can die young. So that's where we are in this story. The religious daughter and the father, who is very devoted to Judaism. I mean, we had a kosher house and kept all the holidays, but no relationship with God. It just wasn't in his choice box. So that's where this story begins. I'm going to start again. My father did not believe in angels. He could not be bothered with spiritual notions or metaphysical concepts. But when he died, and I stood beside his sheet-covered body in the mortuary's refrigerated room, I was overwhelmed by the sense that legions of angels were surrounding my father and escorting his soul to the next world. And I, his ardently spiritual daughter, stood there envying his place in the world to come. According to Judaism, angels can be created by human beings. Every good thought, word, and deed gives birth to a positive force in the universe, which is called an angel. These angels are eternal. They hover around us throughout our life and accompany us to our reward after our death. Conversely, every evil thought, word, and deed creates a bad angel or demon. They also hover over us until, in the heavenly court, they become our accusers. I could recognize the faces of many of the angels that filled that cold, white-tiled room in Birchler's funeral parlor. One whole contingent was born on those rainy mornings when my father, driving to work, would pull over to the bus stops along the way and offer a ride to anyone going to Camden. And over there was the angel of the black eye, which my father got when he accosted a big black man he caught shoplifting in his drugstore. A policeman who happened into the drugstore at that moment arrested the man, but my father refused to press charges. Instead, he offered his assailant a job in the store so so that he could earn money to pay for the items he had tried to steal. I recognized another angel, born at the end of a cold winter day when I was catching a ride home from the drugstore with my father. My father was a pharmacist. He had a drugstore on Broadway in Camden, New Jersey. My father daily delivered prescriptions to the homes of people who were too sick to come in for them. I was in a hurry to get home that day. This happened when I was a college student, home visiting. I was always in a hurry. I was in a hurry to get home that day, but my father assured me he had only one delivery to make. He drove up to a dilapidated house in the ghetto that Camden had become and disappeared into the house. By the time he emerged 15 minutes later, I was rabid. "What took you so long?" I scolded him. My father, who never explained himself, but who did not want to listen to my harangue, answered simply, "The house was ice cold. No wonder the woman is sick. So I tried to call the coal company to order her a load of coal, but their line was busy until a minute ago." My father was a man of a few words, and that was his explanation. Hovering close to my father's body were the poinsettia angels. Christmas was a rare day off for my father since the drugstore was open 6 days a week, and Sunday he invariably went in for a few hours to finish work from the previous week. But instead of relaxing on Christmas when he as a Jew had nothing to do, my father would fill up the back of his station wagon with gift poinsettias. Most of these poinsettias he delivered to the poor Black and Puerto Rican women who lived in the neighborhood near his store. My father started this store in the 1920s. It was a thriving Jewish neighborhood, but over the decades, it turned in, as most inner cities did, to a Black and Puerto Rican neighborhood. And by the time I was a teenager, that's what it was. So he would deliver on Christmas, he would deliver poinsettias. He would fill up the back of the station wagon and spend his Christmas day delivering poinsettias to women who lived in his neighborhood, in the neighborhood of the drugstore. When my brother Joe was a teenager, he usually did the footwork of taking the poinsettias into the houses. Many of the women, without husbands and with a brood of children to tend to, told Joe that this poinsettia was the only thing of beauty they received all year long. Among the regular poinsettia recipients was a woman suffering from MS who lived in a nursing home. Every year, Joe would bring the poinsettia into her room, place it on the table, and mumble, "Merry Christmas," while the paralyzed woman would follow him with her eyes, unable even to nod a thank you. Finally, one Christmas, Joe asked the nurses at the nursing station who this woman was. They told him that she had been a wealthy daughter of a fine family engaged to be married when she contracted MS. Her fiance broke the engagement, her money was used up in doctor and care bills, and eventually even her family dropped all contact with her. In the course of a year, the nurses told Joe, the only card or gift this woman received was this poinsettia from my father. After Joe went away to college, my father did all the poinsettia deliveries by himself. Overweight, with varicose veins from standing in the drugstore since 1925, stricken with the arthritis that made it increasingly painful for him to move his legs, my father delivered these poinsettias until he retired from the drugstore at the age of 75. One corner of the mortuary room was filled with library angels. After my father retired, he volunteered for the local library to deliver books to shut-ins. Leaning on his cane and limping from his arthritis, he often had to climb flights of stairs to reach the desolate apartments of people, usually younger and sometimes less incapacitated than he, who had run out of reasons to get out of bed. My father involved himself with the plight of each one. He didn't just take them the books for them to the library. He got to know them, like what were their problems, what did they need. A man told my father that he suffered from aching back pains. So then and there, without an appointment, my father took him to his own orthopedic doctor. A woman confided that she had lost all sense that she counted for anything. My father arranged to pick her up on election day to take her to the polls, convincing her of the importance of her vote. My father lived in a world without strangers. He could not stand in a supermarket line or sit in a restaurant table without striking up a conversation with the person next to him. I was always terribly embarrassed by this utter disregard for personal space. I had this feeling that perhaps the young Irishman at the adjoining table would rather converse with his family than with this bald-headed Jew with whom we had nothing in common. Invariably, however, my father found a point of connection. It was unbelievable. He always found a point of connection. Either the Irishman had an uncle who was a pharmacist, or he had an aunt who had graduated Camden High with my Aunt Mamie in 1929, or he used as his children's pediatrician Dr. Hansen, my father's old friend, or he had summered in the same Pocono Mountain resorts to which my father once took us. By the time the waitress brought our check or we reached the cashier in the supermarket line, the erstwhile strangers were always smiling as warmly as if they had found a long-lost uncle. Didn't my father know that in the latter half of the 20th century, alienation was the pervasive mindset of society? In fact, although my father lived all of his 86 years in that century, the 20th century, he was never a 20th century man. When I was a psychology major at Brandeis University, arguing with my father once about some sociological issue, he stunned me by announcing that he did not believe in sociology or psychology. I was flabbergasted. Was sociology some nebulous religious system that one could choose to believe or not believe? And when in the 1960s, fired up by my leftist political convictions, I inveighed against the oppression of the lower classes, citing statistics of starvation in affluent America, my father retorted angrily, "Ridiculous. If someone in Camden is hungry, all they need to do is come to me or the minister on Stevens Street." There was a church on Stevens Street. That there could be societal problems that could not be solved by a kind and generous neighbor was beyond my father's comprehension. Now, more than 40 years later, I wonder whether he was right. My father was not a rich man, but he gave and lent money as if he had it. During the Six-Day War, when the American Jewish community rallied to Israel's emergency need, my father, with 2 children in expensive private colleges, found he had no money to give to Israel. So he went to the bank and borrowed $4,000, a lot of money in 1967, which he donated to the Israel Emergency Fund. Later, when the local Jewish community was collecting money for a geriatric home, my father took out a second mortgage on his house in order to have a proper sum to contribute. As well, my father regularly lent money to any of the drugstore customers who asked him. Most of these loans were never repaid. When we were sitting Shiva for my father, the 7-day mourning period after a death, we were sitting Shiva for my father. Carl, the Italian pharmacist who had bought the drugstore from him, told us how, when my father was transferring the store over to him, they came upon a 1-inch thick notebook filled with entries. Carl asked what it was. My father replied that this was his record of outstanding loans. Carl asked how much it was worth. Tossing the book into the wastebasket, my father shrugged. "It's priceless." He just threw it away. Born just a year after his parents immigrated from Odessa in 1902, when my father was barely 17 years younger than his mother. Yet I remember seeing him in his 60s, a big 6-foot-tall man, his balding hair completely gray, waiting on his 80-year-old mother with such filial solicitude. Many times I watched in awe as my father mutely accepted my grandmother's petulant scoldings. He paid for his mother's 2-bedroom apartment plus full-time help. And when he finished his 10 or 12-hour workday in the drugstore, almost daily he went to check on his mother and made sure he had everything she needed. He also assumed responsibility for Nana, my mother's mother. When my parents built their dream house in the suburbs, they included a room for Nana, who was stricken with Parkinson's disease. While my mother did the labor of dressing, bathing, and caring for her mother, my father took care of her expenses as a matter of course. When Carl bought the drugstore, his lawyer and my father's lawyer drew up a purchase agreement. After it was signed, and as Carl and his lawyer walked to his car, the lawyer said to Carl, "You just wasted your money." Carl gulped, but the lawyer continued, "With that man, a handshake would have been enough." The day after my father died, his rabbi came to talk to the family in preparation for the funeral. Of course, he knew my father well, because my father, his name was Irving, or his real name was Yisrael. He was named Israel, and then later in life changed it to a more American name, Irving Levinsky, had been a pillar of the synagogue and had accompanied my mother to Shabbat services every week. Nevertheless, the rabbi asked the various family members gathered in the living room if there was anything special we wanted him to include in his eulogy. An amazing scene of revelation unfolded. As each family member recounted the tales of my father's acts of kindness that he or she had personally witnessed, and that I've written about in this story, the rest of us learned about them for the first time. My father never talked about anything he did, not even to my mother. A gruff man with a short temper and a big voice, his shortcomings were as obvious as his merits were hidden. We knew that he was generous and that he had helped many people, but not even those of us closest to him knew the extent of the money he had loaned, the jobs he had found, the individuals he had rescued. I had this recurrent experience growing up. My mother didn't drive, and so my father was always working in the drugstore. So sometimes I'd be in the drugstore and I'd want to go home, and I'd need a ride home to the suburbs. The bus didn't go to the suburbs. We moved out to the suburbs when I was 9.5 years old. So my father would get somebody was there at the drugstore. My father would ask him to give me a ride home to the drugstore. It was about to our house in the suburbs, about a 20-minute drive away. And this happened over and over again. I'd get a ride from some man whom I did not know and had never seen before and would never see again, not a family friend or anybody part of our life. And when he would drop me off at home, I would say, "Thank you for the ride." And he would say to me, "You don't have to thank me. You could never thank me. There's nothing I could do enough for what your father did for me." What did my father do for this man? I didn't know who the guy was. Happened over and over again. Don't thank me. I could never thank you enough. I could never do anything enough to repay what your father did for me. I had no idea what my father did for him, and I didn't ask. I was just a teenager. My father did not believe in life after death nor in the world to come. He expected no rewards for giving people rides in the rain or for finding jobs for the sons of his ghetto clientele. How amazed then he must have been to find himself ascending to the next world, escorted by legions of familiar angels. Standing there, meditating over his body in that chilly mortuary room, I found myself saying, "Surprise, Dad." But there was also a revelation for me in that God-thronged room. I saw that deeds are what count. Not good intentions, not beliefs, not convictions, not even spiritual consciousness, but deeds. Although I had been practicing for 5 years, and I knew that Judaism was a religion less of faith than of action, of fulfilling concrete commandments, I preferred to live in the ethereal realm of the mind and the spirit. Standing beside my father's body, gazing at his luminous face, I was shocked to realize who he had become by virtue of his deeds alone. My father's road to heaven was paved with poinsettias and popsicle wrappers that he bought popsicles for. I skipped that part. How he used to buy popsicles, tell the ice cream man to give popsicles to all the kids on the block. And all the neighborhood women would say, "Oh, I'm angry at you, Mr. Levinsky. We had to pick up popsicle wrappers all afternoon." And if there was a gap created by the faith he did not hold or the commandments he never learned to obey, I saw that it was spanned like an immense bridge by that book of unpaid loans he had tossed away. I, who had spent some 40 years wrestling with profound concepts and lofty aspirations, had nothing in my entourage as significant as my father's coal order for the sick lady. And so I could feel my father winking at me, his religious daughter, from his honored place in the next world, saying, surprise. So the message that I want to convey to you today on his yahrzeit is that while I was searching for God, and as I said, I spent 15 years in an ashram, 5 years in Jerusalem, learning Torah, I was seeking God. But while I was seeking God, my father was becoming godly. There's a mitzvah in the Torah, a commandment in the Torah, the halakta b'drachav, to imitate God. It's actually a mitzvah of the Torah. It's one of the 613 mitzvot of the Torah, to imitate God. How do you imitate God? God is infinite. We're just finite mortal human beings. But we know some things about God that we can imitate. We know that God is a giver because he gives us everything, every breath, the sunshine, the rain, the cells in our body, our immune systems, our endocrine systems, our hearing, our seeing. God gives us everything. God is a giver. We imitate God by being a giver. We know that God chose connection. According to the Kabbalists, God created the world for the sake of having a relationship, which is a whole nother subject I'm not going to go into today. So we know that God is forgiving. We know that God is loving. And that's how we imitate God. Years after my father died, I joined a Musarvad. Musar is the Jewish method, traditional Jewish method of working on one's character traits. It takes 2 to 4 years to change a midah, a character trait. So we were a group of women who worked very earnestly with a rabbi, with daily exercises to work on our character traits. I learned 2 things that were really life-changing for me. I learned many things in the Musarvad, but 2 things that were extremely interesting. There were 2 Musar greats at the end of the 20th century, Rav Dessler and Rav Shlomo Wolbe. Rav Eliyahu Dessler said that the basic choice in life is between being a giver and a taker. That's the basic choice in life. Rav Wolbe said that the basic choice in life, they're not so different, but they're different aspects of the same truth. Rav Wolbe said that the basic choice in life is between choosing connection or disconnection. My father never studied Musar, but throughout his life, he made the choice to be a giver and to connect. He connected to people. I would see him like, here I was, it was 60s, and I was very politically involved, and I was on the left, and racism was already in the 60s a very big issue. And I remember coming into the store once and seeing this like teenage Black girl asking my father if she could speak to him privately. So he took her into, the back of the drugstore and spoke to her, and she came out. And I asked him, what did she want to speak to you about? And he said, she was worried she has venereal disease. And she wanted to ask me, like, what were the symptoms and what could it be that and what she should do. And I thought, how come, why is she turning to this middle-aged Jewish man? He was a Republican, and local politics in Camden, the Republicans were the goodies. And why is she turning to this middle-aged Jewish white man? Why does she trust him? Because she trusted him. She turned to him because she trusted him. Because all his clientele at the drugstore They all trusted him. They called him Doc because he had forged a relationship with them, not the kind of relationship that I know. I know of relationships that are based on talking, words, vulnerability, opening up your feelings. My father never talked about feelings, but everybody had this connection with him. My father once, it was Pesach. I came home from college and during the years I lived at the ashram, I came home every year for a week at Pesach time and a week at Rosh Hashanah time. So I was always home for the Seder. Now again, my father, we had a complete Seder. So we didn't skip anything. We read the entire Haggadah. Oh yes, you can put a picture of my father up now. I like that picture there, Svi. Please put that picture up. There. That's my father. When he was president of the New Jersey Pharmaceutical Association in the the end of the 1950s, 1956, and this is this dinner in his honor at that of the New Jersey Pharmaceutical Association. So, oh yeah, and you can put up all the pictures. I love these pictures. So, that's my father as a boy, the oldest of 5 children. This is my father at my wedding. I didn't give him the nachas of getting married and having children until it was 3 years before his death. He was 83 years old when I got married. So I was telling you about Pesach. So my uncle Toots was the president of the Orthodox synagogue, and we had a full Pesach Seder with the whole extended family, all the cousins and the cousins' children, and in our basement. We had a finished rec room, and my mother would put white sheets over this oversized ping pong table and other tables. We would have like 30 people at the Pesach Seder, and didn't skip anything to the end. And after my Uncle Toots died when I was 21 years old, and then we moved upstairs to the dining room, and we set the Seder in the dining room, but we still didn't skip anything. Fewer people. 1 year during the Pesach Seder, during the meal, of course, you don't skip anything. It takes a long time to get to the meal. And so we were very, hungry by the time we got to the meal. We were in the middle of the meal and the phone rang. It was Nita. Nita was a black woman who served as our housekeeper for all the years I was growing up. My grandmother, my mother's mother, lived with us, our Nana. She had Parkinson's disease, and this was in the years before there were drugs like L-Dopa for Parkinson's disease. She was very, very incapacitated. She couldn't get up out of a chair by herself, certainly couldn't bathe herself, couldn't dress herself, and Nita really was a very loyal and wonderful helper, came in 5 days a week. At some point when I was at college, Nita stopped working for us, and I don't know what happened to her. I don't know how much. I was away at college in Boston, and I don't know how much contact my parents had with her. But there we were in the middle of the meal of the Seder, and the phone rang, and it was Nita. She had been arrested for drinking. She had become an alcoholic, and the police found her literally drunk in the gutter. And they arrested her for, I guess, vagrancy or whatever they arrest drunk people for, and took her and put her in jail. And she got one phone call, and she called my father, and she asked him to come and bail her out of jail. And my father could have said, "Look, it's late. We're fine. We're eating. You can sleep it off in jail, and I'll come tomorrow morning, and bail you out." But my father didn't. He said, "I'm coming right away." My father didn't know. He didn't reflect on. He never learned that what is Pesach? What is Passover all about? It's about freedom. It's about the Jews the Israelite slaves being liberated, getting out of Egypt to freedom. He didn't think of that at all. But there he was on Pesach night in the in the middle of the meal, as part of the Seder, and he got in the car and he drove into Camden, the courthouse, to liberate Nita from jail. I went with him. Wasn't going to miss this. I'd never been to jail in my life. My father went to the courthouse. He paid the money, of course, with bail. You're paying with the idea that when the person shows up in court at the proper day and time, they get the bail money back. Of course, my father didn't expect Nita would show up in court at the right time and day. And so he didn't expect to get the money back. He posted the bail. We waited until Nita was released. She came forward. There was no emotional scene like, thank you. Oh, are you okay? My father wasn't that type of person. Okay, you're out, fine. Nita was like, I don't remember if Nita even said thank you. She was not in good state. She was, she said she was going home. My father and I went to our car and drove home and finished the meal and finished the Seder. So these two things, choosing to be a giver and choosing connection, was something my father did throughout his life. And that's really the takeaway I want you to have. I'm going to look at if there are questions. This is a choice that's open to all of us. This is a choice that's open to all of us. Through almost every day of our lives, to be a giver and to choose connection. And my father chose it without any religious education. Okay, let me see if there's any questions. Okay, so first I want to tell you that if you're interested in this book, the story I shared with you is from my book, God Winked. And its subtitle is Tales and Lessons from My Spiritual Adventures. And I have a lot of interesting stories in here. And if you're interested in buying it, Svi, can you put up the link? Svi has put up the link there in the chat box. So you can click on that and you can order the book if you'd like to. So my friend Ruth, thank you for coming, Ruth. Ruth is on with us. And my friend Julie is on with us. Julie knew my father. Julie from southern New Jersey, Morristown, New Jersey. Thank you so much for coming on, Julie. We went to India together, 1968, 69. We haven't seen each other for probably a couple decades. I'm so happy to see you on, Julie. Let's see. And Claire says, incredibly moving and inspiring. What a beautiful soul your father was. May his neshama have an aliyah. So, yes, again, as I said in the beginning, the only way a person gets an elevation of their soul once they're in the next world is by people in this world doing something good for his aliyat neshama. And if you've been inspired by anything I've said, to make such choices, to choose to be a giver, to choose connection, even with people who are very different than you are, to choose connection. Giving, Rabbi Nachman said something very interesting about giving. He said, and it leads to another story about my father. He said that giving charity, of course, is a wonderful thing to do. There's so many needy people and it's so important to give charity, but you haven't really fulfilled the commandment to give charity until it hurts. In other words, if you give money that you didn't need anyway, it's not going to make a difference in your life that you are without the sum that you just gave to charity, then it's not real charity. The charity and all giving, it has to cost you something to be real. If you give away time that you had extra time, it's so different than if you give away time when you didn't have extra time. And it costs you something to give that time to listen to somebody going on and on about their troubles, or to help somebody in some way. That you gave them your time when you'd rather have been doing something else, So that's real giving. I think one of the greatest acts of giving my father ever did was he had a sidekick in the drugstore. The drugstore was big. It had a luncheonette in the back. It was quite a big drugstore. The days before, the super pharmacies that, the chain pharmacies that came in later and really undermined our drugstore. So he had a janitor named Jimmy. And Jimmy would like make deliveries with my father's car to deliver medicine to sick people. And the idea of sick people having to go to a pharmacy to get medicine like that, my father thought that was absurd. Of course, if someone's sick, you deliver it to their house. So Jimmy would make deliveries. He was always helping my father out. He was my father's right-hand man. And they were very close. And Jimmy was like a part of the family. Jimmy was like always around. And then at some point, Jimmy got married. And his wife wanted him to have more income. And by this time, things were not good in the drugstore as far as the business went, the income of the drugstore. And my father couldn't afford to raise Jimmy's salary. But he wanted him to have a good relationship with his wife. So my father got the furrier across the street. There was a fur store across the street and down the block from the drugstore. And my father, of course, had a very good relationship with all the local shopkeepers. My father got the furrier to hire Jimmy to deliver furs. In the days when people had furs, I don't know if they still do anymore. And so Jimmy left my father's employment and went to work for the fur store. This was giving till it hurt. Very hard for my father to be without Jimmy's help. And but he did it because Jimmy's wife wanted him to have a job that paid more. So that's the kind of giving that my father did all the time. Really focusing on the needs of the other person and taking care of them. And I want to also say, I said in a recent one of these broadcasts that I mentioned Rav Kook. Rav Kook, one of his central teachings was there are concentric circles. You have to start by loving yourself. And then you have to love your family. You can't love the whole world if you don't have a good relationship with your own parents, children, siblings. You have to love your family. This ring, by the way, is the wedding ring my father gave to my mother. I mean, he also gave her a gold band, but he gave her this diamond wedding ring. My father loved my mother so much. They had such a wonderful marriage for 45 years. They married late in life. My father was 40. My mother was 37. Why? Because when they both became marriageable age, the Depression hit. And getting married in those years was like selfish. How could you get married? You had to, whatever money you had coming in, had to go to support your parents and your siblings. And so, until the Depression passed, like, how could you think of getting married? So they got married late in life. My mother was 33. My father was 40. So the first level is to love yourself. You have to love yourself. Then you have to love your family. And then if you're a Jew, you should love the Jewish people. There's 12 million Jews, and that's quite an order to really love all the Jewish people. And then to love all humanity. And then for the circle out is all sentient beings. So my father, I've told you so many stories of him helping, people in the community. I've only told you a fraction. But he helped his family even more than he helped the community. I told you about him supporting his mother. He also supported he had a sister she was a pharmacist, and he opened a drugstore down the block from where his drugstore was, like 2 blocks away in the high-speed line, so that she would have an occupation, an income. She was the manager. He opened that for her. She would be the manager of her drugstore. And helped when her daughter got married. My father paid for the wedding in a hotel in Philadelphia. My father paid for many members of the family and their needs. My father, we didn't go out to eat that much, very, very rarely. But whenever my father went out to eat, he always picked up the check. My father was just a giver. And there's another character trait, a midah, that we call Bal Habayit. in Hebrew, the midah of taking responsibility. Taking responsibility for that everything should be good for everybody else. It's not just I have my life and I'll take care of my family, but I take care of everybody who comes into my orbit. So so are there any questions or anybody would like to say anything? That's the virtue of a live broadcast is you can, I'd like to hear from you. Okay, I don't see any other questions. Do you, Svi, do you see any other questions? Any questions or comments? Oh, private chat. Okay, so with that, I'm going to, somebody, Claudia is saying, thank you, very inspiring. Oh, and Oriella is saying, amazing story, amazing person. How do we imitate someone like him the best way? So that's the basic question. How do you imitate someone like him? By choosing to be a giver beyond your comfort zone. That's really the test in life. Going beyond our comfort zone to be a giver and to choose connection. And God gives us opportunities every single day. Every single day, God gives us opportunities to be a giver and to choose connection. To choose connection with people who bug us and bother us, and to be a giver beyond the point, your comfort point, in terms of money, in terms of time. I think those are the two biggest areas that most of us have opportunities to be givers, in terms of money. Like right now with the Ukrainian situation, there's a million charity appeals to help the Ukrainians, especially. I mean, I get so many appeals to help Ukrainian Jews. I have here in my in the notes here on my channel, I have a story, an amazing story about the escape of Chief Rabbi of Kiev and his wife. Amazing story, a really miraculous and exciting escape. And I have their charity fund. They're working day and night to still get more Jews out of the Ukraine, out of Kiev. People they know, they had 2,500 people in their community. And so their rabbi, having gotten out of Kiev and gotten out of the Ukraine and gotten safely to Israel, Rabbi Markovich went back to the border to help more Jews get out. So that's there in my notes below. You can see how to donate to the Jews of the Ukraine. And so here it is. We just put it up in here in the chat box. How to donate to the Jews of Ukraine. So the question is, how much should I give? Of course, you should give to such a worthy cause. You're saving lives, literally saving lives. Which in our day and age, I mean, how often do we get a chance to save lives with money? So the question is, how much will I give? So that's the question. How much beyond your comfort zone can you go? Okay, so thank you all for coming. And so there's one question here. Claire is asking, when did you come to appreciate how all the wonderful traits of your father? I think I came to appreciate it that day. The day after he died, standing in the refrigerated room next to his body and seeing his glowing face. And I mean, I had spent, at that time I was 42 years old. From the time I went to India when I was 20, I'd spent 22 years like on the spiritual path. So I knew something about spirituality. And standing there in that room, I realized, I had spent 15 years meditating in an ashram. I picked up that something was going on that really surprised me. I thought my father was just involved in the mundane, where I was involved in the spiritual. You know? And standing next to his body after he died, I realized this is a spirituality beyond a level that I have known. And that's when I became aware that something, wow, was going on. And then, of course, when the rabbi asked us later in the day, to tell everybody, tell their stories, I knew my father had done so much good, but that so much hidden good that came out that day, just like it just got better and better. Should I share with you one thing? I guess I should. I'm going to. I don't know if I should or not, but I will. I'm going to share with you one thing that I have never shared publicly before. My father came to me after he died, that week of Shiva. Several of my friends have told me that their parent came to them, like after they died, within the first week or the first year. Parents come usually at night in a dream, but there's a difference between a dream and when a parent or loved one who's passed on comes. It's a visitation. It's not just a dream. My father came to me the week of Shiva, and he said to me, "In this world, all that has value is silver." Now, I studied Kabbalah. I was studying Kabbalah, and I knew what silver meant. In Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, there are two basic dispositions of God. One is chesed. Chesed means loving kindness, giving forth. And the other is din. Din means, din or gevura. It's to do with setting boundaries, holding back, judgment, strict judgment. A balance is needed. God has to exercise both. We're told in Judaism to lead with the right hand. The right hand is chesed, loving kindness, because it's the stronger hand. But you also need din. You also need boundaries and strict judgment, justice sometimes. My father came to me and he said, the only thing that has value in this world, where he was now, is silver. Silver is chesed. Now, this was his experience. I don't know if somebody else who had a different experience would have said differently, but that's the message my father gave me. That chesed, loving kindness, giving, is what has value in the next world. On his yahrzeit, I'm sharing that message with you. Have a great day.